Today we'll be talking about the case study of Eve White and Black. You guys might know. And there's a movie. I think there was also a book written about the three faces of Eve. I'm not going to talk about the Hollywood one. I'm going to talk about the one that was actually published. So I'll give you guys a little introduction of dissociative identity disorder. It's also referred to as multiple personality disorder, but it was changed from that in the DSM-3 to the DSM-4. It's pretty much two different people in one body. There's two different personas or more. You can also have dissociative amnesia, which is a memory gap in events throughout the day. It can be personal events, traumatic events. It's typically associated with the result of trauma or childhood abuse. And after 30 years from when it was first studied, it wasn't introduced into the DSM until then. And it's also a very controversial disorder. It's still kind of unreliable today. So I'll talk about how things kind of were before the case of Eve Black and White. Like we talked about, there's kind of an intersection between spirituality and psychology. In the 16th and 17th centuries, multiple personality disorder was kind of considered possession because alters were said to have evil behavior. They would supposedly cause them to self-harm themselves, starve themselves, and other conversion behaviors like that. The first documented case was in 1584, which was Jean Ferry. She kept a diary of the experiences that she was having in her exorcism, because that was a treatment for that back then, because they considered it possession. She believed that she had 7 different devils inside of her, which is depicted in the picture there, and she always complained that she had really bad heart problems. And with that picture there, it shows the 7 different devils, which are based off of the 7 deadly sins that are supposedly residing inside of her heart. Then the next case was Sister Benedetta. She was possessed by 3 different angels, supposedly, and she would have self-mutilation, self-harm, self-beating. She would strangle herself, and supposedly she had a memory gap where one of the angel boys initiated a sexual relationship with another nun. And as we know, back then that wasn't very good. It wasn't very accepted back then, and she had no recollection of it. But in this time period, it was considered possessions, not a psychological disorder. And along with like shifting from spirituality to psychology, the DSM changed definitions of every edition as we learn more about it. When it was the first edition in 1952 was a psychoneurotic disorder with dissociative reaction. The definition is very broad. It was pretty much revolved around anxiety, and if you had this anxiety, you would displace yourself and dissociate yourself. It was just depersonalization, amnesia, dream state. They considered sleepwalking part of the characteristics of a psychoneurologic disorder. So in 1954, Corbett Thigpen and Herbie Cleckley did the case study of Eve. It took over 14 months, and it was over 100 hours of therapy. And their purpose was to pretty much document and produce a case that would quantify symptoms of multiple personality disorder. And in order for that to be in the DSM, they needed to have evidence that it was actually a valid disorder, because a lot of people, like I said, back then it was a very spiritual-based perspective, I guess you could say. So they didn't really think it was a psychological thing, it was a devil thing. So Eve White was a 25-year-old woman. She was having a failing marriage, so her 4-year-old daughter lived with her parents, so she was really concerned about that. She went to the doctor originally for headaches that would cause her to go blind, and she would have blackouts and not remember anything when she woke up. And the doctors couldn't find any physical cause, so they referred her to a psychiatrist, which would have been Big Pin Cleckley. Interviewing with her, they recognized that she did have some emotional difficulties, which with the failing marriage and not having her daughter, I'm sure anyone probably would have some. They couldn't really find anything out of the ordinary, except she did have one blackout, but when they hypnotized her, which was a really big thing back then, she was able to recall what had happened, so they still weren't really sure if there was anything wrong with her. Over time, they would keep meeting with her, and her symptoms seemed to improve, and they didn't notice anything unusual. They did interview some of her family, and her husband would report strange behavior. Like she would go into town and just spend an outrageous amount of money on clothes, which he said was normally not like her. And then she would just have random, uncontrollable fits of rage. So, like I said, over time meeting with her, they didn't really think anything was psychologically wrong with her. She just has a tough time. But one day they got an unusual letter, and the last paragraph on the letter, they said looked like a child had written it, and it wasn't really in the form of how she would speak. And they asked Eve about it, and she recalled writing the letter, but she never finished it. She thought she had ripped it up and thrown it away. And then as they kept asking and asking about it, she became very agitated. And then she reported that she had been hearing voices over the past few months. And that's what led to the discovery of Eve Black. When they were interviewing her and she was asked about the voices, she grabbed her head like she was in pain. And that's when this new persona came out, and she smiled and said, "Hey, Doc." Here's a picture of the handwriting. You probably can't see it very well from there, but you can tell that there's a pretty clear difference from the first handwriting and the second. So a little bit about Eve Black. She could pop out unexpectedly, but as they started interviewing her, she was only be able to come out if she was hypnotized. She was just very mischievous. She would lie a lot. When she would come out, they would avoid family. She would seek the company of strangers and denied that she was ever married. But after 8 months of treatment, she made improvements, and Eve Black wasn't as dominant. And here's just a comparison that they did to quantify the data that there is 2 different personalities. You can see the IQs are different. This one, the EEG, you can see that they are different. And just doing the interview process, you can tell the personalities are completely different from each other. So after the 8 months of improvement, she started getting the headaches and blackouts again. And they asked Eve Black if she was the one that was causing all of this. And Eve Black was actually concerned. So during one of the sessions, Eve White fell asleep, and a different persona came out that wasn't Eve Black and was not Eve White. And going through the interviews, they pretty much just used Jane, which was the third personality, as a tool to tell when Eve Black was lying. Jane was more in favor of Eve White than she was Eve Black. So they came up with this idea, because they thought that Jane was the best personality out of all 3 of them, that originally they wanted to integrate Eve White and Eve Black and kind of get her back to her normal self. And then they realized that that caused her severe emotional stress because Eve Black was
I have to stop you here, Lexi,
Oh, that's
because we're out of time. We do have 1 quick minute for questions.
You said that some were classified as demons and some were classified as angels, like the spirits. What was that?
Yep, I actually don't know. On the gene one, it was the 7 deadly sins. So, yeah, on the other one, it said it was 3 boy angels is what she had documented it as, so I'm not sure.
In a very succinct way, how did this change psychology?
Well, it pretty much separated spiritualism from psychology and actually putting a psychological explanation on a phenomenon like that. And then just with the definitions of the DSM, like now there's actually not very broad criteria. But I think just in general, just shifting from spiritualism to psychology, and I think providing quantitative data for something that you can't really explain kind of adds a lot more validity for psychology as a science.
Nice. Fortunately, that's all the time we have.